Have you ever wondered what would happen if the very person you trusted the most, the one you sacrificed your entire career for, saw you as nothing more than a shadow? I lived that way for 20 years. But then, in a single moment, everything changed. This is the story of how I turned silence into strength and humiliation into victory. Chapter 1: The Humiliation at the Gala. He introduced me at the company gala not as a life partner, not as the companion who had stood by him for 20 years, but merely as a decorative piece. With a smug smile, he raised his glass of wine and said, "This is my wife. She's best at keeping the bed warm and cooking dinner." Laughter erupted from the crowd. A few men clapped him on the shoulder, while some women giggled behind their glasses of red wine. I lowered my head, my face flushed hot, yet my throat tightened, unable to respond. The wedding band on my finger felt like it was cutting into my flesh, reminding me that I was bound, not respected. This wasn't the first time he had humiliated me in front of others. But this time was different. That sentence was the final drop that made the glass overflow. In the blinding lights reflecting off the marble floor, I saw smirks everywhere, and I felt my worth being diminished, spreading out like an oil stain. He continued his performance. "And she's also quite the professional when it comes to doing the laundry. I'm such a lucky man." Another roar of laughter followed. I bit my lip, wishing I could disappear. In their eyes, I was no longer a woman with knowledge, with dreams. I was only a shadow behind my husband, living to serve. As I tried to retreat toward the bar to escape those mocking stares, I felt someone's gaze on me. From across the room, Liam Morrison, the CEO of the company, stood silently with a glass of wine in his hand. He wasn't laughing, nor did he clap in congratulations like the others. His eyes met mine only for a brief moment, but in them I read something different, understanding. Perhaps pity, perhaps awareness, or perhaps he already knew the truth. The woman standing beside me, a colleague from the Tokyo branch, leaned in and whispered, "You're so lucky to have a husband who appreciates the simple things." What seemed like a harmless compliment cut deeper like a blade against an open wound. Appreciation or humiliation wrapped in the disguise of humor. I sipped my champagne only to find it tasteless, stripped of all sweetness. Meanwhile, from afar, Brian's laughter still echoed. He reveled in his act, turning me into the centerpiece of his crude jokes. That night at the gala, surrounded by dozens of glamorous faces, I confronted a chilling truth. I was no longer myself. I had let him turn me into someone invisible, the one who worked in the shadows, remembered only as the keeper of the household flame. But I also knew in that fleeting moment when the CEO's eyes met mine that my story would not end there. Another door had just opened, though I did not yet know where it would lead me. Chapter 2: The Conversation with the CEO. I stood at the bar, trying to swallow my humiliation with another sip of flat champagne. The loud laughter in the distance cut into my pride like sharp blades, and then I heard a calm voice beside me. "Are you enjoying the party?" I turned. Liam Morrison, the CEO of the company. He stood there, not loud, not flamboyant, simply observing. I forced a polite smile. Quite enlightening. I chose my words carefully, the way I had learned after years of living in Brian's shadow. Say just enough, attract no attention, create no waves. But Liam didn't look away. His gaze was intent, the kind of focus few had ever given me. Then he lowered his voice. "I've been meaning to speak with you for some time. About the Peterson proposal." I nearly dropped my glass. The Peterson proposal. The strategy Brian had presented to the board as though it were his own. The very one I had stayed up for 3 straight weeks to analyze risks, draft every number, every chart. I had thought no one would ever know, no one would ever remember. "I'm glad it was well received," I answered softly, concealing the storm rising within me. "Not just well received," Liam said deliberately, "but exceptional. The forecasting models, the market entry strategies, the cultural approaches, all of it went beyond expectations. The board took special note, and they didn't believe it was Brian's work. I froze. The noise of laughter in the distance faded into nothing. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart. I know whose effort it truly was, Liam continued, his eyes never leaving mine. And I want you to understand that the board has begun to see it too. We're discussing organizational restructuring, and we need new perspectives, people with real analytical and strategic capabilities. He handed me a business card, just a small piece of cardstock. But in that moment, it weighed heavy in my hand like gold. Call me on Monday. We have much to discuss about your future here. Liam turned and walked away, leaving me frozen with my unfinished glass of champagne. My fingers trembled as I clutched the card. In that instant, I saw a door crack open. An opportunity I had believed after 2 decades I would never again touch. I glanced toward Brian. He was still basking in the spotlight, still telling stories, still soaking up every ounce of attention, convinced the world revolved around him. He had no idea that only minutes earlier I had been given a key one that could change the entire game. That night, as we left the gala, Brian chattered cheerfully about the investment opportunities he had just discussed, while I sat silently at his side, my hand resting on the small purse where the business card lay hidden. A secret, a promise, a spark ready to ignite the entire false palace he had so carefully built. Chapter 3. 20 Years in the Shadows. Perhaps to understand why I kept silent for so many years, we need to go back to the very first day I met Brian. I was only 23, freshly graduated, working as a receptionist at Hartwell Industries. Back then, I still carried my intact dreams, believing that intelligence and hard work alone would be enough to take me far. But reality was far harsher. What I mostly received were appraising glances at my appearance, and meaningless errands barked out as orders. Brian appeared like a different breeze, tall, confident, with a smile that could draw the attention of an entire room. But what made me truly falter was the way he spoke to me at that company party you're wasted sitting behind a reception desk. Someone as smart as you should be running a department, not transferring phone calls. It was the first time in my life that anyone had recognized value in me. I believed him. And soon enough, we were dating, then married, and I stepped into a new life, a spacious house, a promise of partnership, of building a career together. Quit your job, Brian said when I hesitated. Think of it as an investment. You'll help me build my career, and then we'll have the means for you to start your own company. This is a partnership, not a sacrifice. I believed it. Even when he brought home stacks of documents and said, just polish this a bit, add a few figures, I happily did it, feeling I was contributing. And when that strategy helped Brian land his very first contract, I even felt proud for both of us. But those little requests grew into habit. He began saying, do the competitive analysis for me, or write the risk report I needed for tomorrow's presentation. I toiled away in the small room at home, surrounded by papers, numbers, and charts. Meanwhile, Brian dined out with clients, raised glasses with executives, and came back boasting how his ideas had convinced them. As time went on, I heard less and less of the word we. He started saying I secured that contract. My strategy made the client agree, and I stayed silent. I remember vividly the night after the Tokyo deal, a project I had poured 3 exhausting weeks into studying everything from Japanese culture to currency fluctuations. Brian walked into the house with a bottle of fine champagne, beaming, I did it. The Japanese client signed an exclusive contract with my company. He kissed me, then called his colleagues to go celebrate, and I stood in the kitchen washing dishes, staring at the soap bubbles shimmering under the light, wondering, why did I feel like an outsider in my own life? I tried speaking up once. During a dinner with his colleagues, I joked, maybe I should start charging Brian consulting fees. Doing this for free forever doesn't seem fair. The table fell silent. Brian forced a smile, but his eyes were so cold they made me shiver. When the guests had left, he leaned close to my ear and whispered, don't you ever embarrass me like that again. You're just doing support work. Don't get it twisted. From that moment, I understood my role with brutal clarity invisible. The mind that contributed but bore no name. The one who stepped back so her husband could shine, until even I began to believe that my disappearance was normal. Year after year, every time Brian got promoted, every time he was honored, I smiled and applauded. But deep inside, I knew the analyses, the numbers, the ideas conceived in that little room of mine, they all carried his name. 20 years. I had lived like a ghost, writing success into existence for someone else. And on that gala night, when he humiliated me before the entire company, I finally realized that shadow had lasted too long. It was time to step into the light. Chapter 4. The Two Version. That morning, Brian walked into the house, tossed his briefcase onto the dining table, his face lit up with excitement, like a child who had just won a game. Big news, he said, pulling off his tie. The board just handed me a major project. Global. They want an international expansion strategy, 3 weeks. This could be my chance to move up to the executive level. I set my coffee cup down and watched as he pulled a thin file out of his briefcase. When he opened it, I had to bite my lip to stop from laughing. Inside were only a few sloppy bullet points. Expand into Asia. Increase market share. Maximize profit. That was it. No analysis, no forecasting, no strategy. A draft so shallow that even a first-year student would find it laughable. "This is what you plan to submit?" I asked. No, Brian shrugged. "That's just the framework. You know how this goes. You'll turn it into a masterpiece. You're the best at this. Make it grand, make it dazzling so they're blown away." He patted my shoulder and headed upstairs for a shower, as if he had just assigned me a trivial task. As if his entire career were a game for which I was always expected to clean up and complete the pieces. I stared after him, listening to the sound of water running upstairs, and in my mind flashed the memory of Liam Morrison's eyes that night at the gala. He had known, he had seen me, and now I had my chance. I spread the documents across the table. For days, my dining room turned into a battlefield, charts covering the walls. Notes plastered everywhere, my laptop glowing through the night. I researched 12 countries, interviewed suppliers across 3 time zones, analyzed hundreds of market reports. I didn't just create an expansion plan, I built a blueprint for the company's entire future strategies for cultural integration partnership models, with local firms' risk scenarios ranging from political crises to currency volatility. But this time, I did it differently. I didn't write just one plan, I wrote 2. The first exactly what Brian expected. Glossy presentation, trendy buzzwords, colorful charts that looked impressive, but shallow, just enough to make an initial impact. That was the version for him to practice in front of the mirror. The second was my real work, deep, precise, inventive. Every number, every strategy bore my unique imprint. I embedded my name in the metadata like an invisible signature that could never be erased. When I looked at the 2 files side by side, the contrast was stark light and shadow. One was only a mask, the other a soul. And I knew it was time to stop writing in the dark. This time I would not let my name disappear. Chapter 5. The fateful meeting Monday arrived, and I had barely slept a wink the night before. In my handbag lay the real strategy, the one that bore my mark. I had already uploaded it to the internal system under my own name, tied to the MBA credentials HR had updated years ago, but no one had ever bothered to notice. I went to the office looking as ordinary as possible. Meanwhile, Brian brimmed with excitement like a general marching to war. He sat in the conference room, rehearsing those hollow lines I had deliberately written into the fake version. He had no idea that the real one, the plan with true weight, was already on the CEO's desk, spread out before the entire board of directors. By noon, my phone buzzed. A gentle female voice came through. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Liam Morrison would like to see you. 2 p.m. office, 32nd floor." I drew in a deep breath. My hands trembled, but inside me burned a fire I had never felt before. Liam's office was vast, glass walls overlooking the city skyline. When I entered, he lifted his head from a file. Not just any file, the proposal. My proposal. Every page printed in color, every chart I had crafted with relentless patience. Close the door, he said slowly. His tone was calm, but it carried the weight of 1,000 pounds. I obeyed, my heart pounding in my chest. This proposal... Liam held up a page, tapping his finger against the initials I'd embedded in the metadata. It's yours, isn't it? In that moment, 20 years of silence swelled inside me. I knew I could deny it, continue living in my husband's shadow. But if I did, I would remain invisible forever. Yes, I said firmly. Every number, every strategy, every word, they are all mine. A faint smile flickered at the corner of Liam's mouth. Not surprise, but confirmation of what he had already suspected. I thought so. The board reviewed both proposals this morning. One was creative, profound visionary. The other was hollow, filled with cliches. I knew exactly which belonged to whom. Liam set the file down and fixed his gaze on me. We're not just looking for a strategy. We're looking for someone capable of leading the entire global expansion. And that person is you. I froze. Miss Carter, he continued with unwavering certainty, the board would like to appoint you head of global operations, effective immediately. The room spun around me. Years of working in the shadows, years of humiliation, all of it culminated in that single moment. I had been recognized. I had been seen. When I stepped out of his office, the business card he had once handed me at the gala had become a key that opened the door to an entirely new life. And I knew a storm was coming for Brian. Because the very thing he had long craved, that seat of power, was now in the hands of the woman he had dismissed as nothing more than a cook and a bed warmer. Chapter 6. The Announcement. Email and the First Look. That Monday morning, the sky was crystal clear, not a single cloud in sight. I made coffee, set out breakfast like I always did. Brian was in high spirits, still convinced this would be the historic day of his career. He sat at the table eating while scrolling on his phone, occasionally mumbling the same presentation lines he had rehearsed in front of the mirror the night before. Then came the familiar ding of a new email. He opened it casually, his eyes flicking across the screen out of habit. But only a second later, his hand froze. The butter knife slipped from his fingers, clattering against the plate. What the hell is this? His voice trembled, and I realized I had never before heard that sound from Brian, a mixture of fear and disbelief. I calmly took a sip of coffee. Something wrong. He looked up, his face drained of color. The announcement from the company. It says, he swallowed hard, you've just been appointed head of global operations, effective immediately. The kitchen fell into a silence so heavy it seemed even the refrigerator stopped humming. I set my cup down and replied slowly, that's right. I accepted the position on Friday. Brian stared at me as though I were speaking a foreign language. Shock in his eyes gave way to panic. No, this has to be a mistake. I need to call Liam right now. He snatched up his phone, punching in the number with frantic urgency. I sat quietly watching. Only a few minutes passed before I saw his shoulders slump, his face collapsing, like someone who had just been struck repeatedly. No, Liam. There must be some mistake. That was my proposal. Why were there two versions? His voice cracked. Then silence so long and so deep that I could almost hear the blood pounding in his ears. When he finally hung up, his hand was shaking uncontrollably. He whispered, the metadata? They said your version was completely original. Mine was patched together. They know everything. I didn't respond. I only looked at him steadily, coldly, with absolute certainty. In that moment, I saw it all. 20 years of contempt, 20 years of stolen credit, 20 years of being made invisible, now crumbling right before his eyes. And for the first time in our marriage, Brian had no words to defend himself. Chapter 7. Stepping into the new office. On my first day with the new title, I stood before the towering building where I had once entered, using the card that marked me as Brian's wife. Today I carried an employee badge engraved with my own name, Danielle Carter, head of global operations. Just one line of text, but it felt as heavy as the 20 years of youth I had traded away. The elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor. For the first time in my life, I wasn't here to drop off documents for my husband, nor to sit silently while he delivered a performance. I was here to take the seat of power he had craved, but could never obtain. "Welcome, Miss Carter." A young woman with bright eyes and a tablet in hand greeted me with a smile. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, your executive assistant. Let me take you to your office." My office. I repeated the words, sounding both strange and sweet. The door opened. A spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. On the dark wooden desk gleamed a polished nameplate reflecting the morning light. Danielle Carter, head of global operations. I placed my hand on the desk, and it felt as though I were touching a dream I once thought forever out of reach. But this dream was real, and this time it bore my name. Shortly after, I had my first meeting with the team that Brian used to manage. They entered the room cautiously, perhaps conditioned to being dismissed or ignored. I remembered Sarah Martinez, a brilliant analyst Brian had sidelined, simply because he feared she might outshine him. "Sarah, I read your market research report on Europe," I began. "It's outstanding. I'd like to promote you to senior analyst. The company needs people with vision like yours." Sarah stared at me, her eyes welling with tears. "Mr. Mitchell always said my reports were just theory, never practical." "Mr. Mitchell was wrong," I replied, firm and direct. "Those analyses are what turn a good strategy into a great one." I saw the eyes around the room begin to light up. Marcus, a young analyst with bold ideas about cryptocurrency. Linda, an expert in South American demographics, whom Brian had dismissed outright. One by one, talents that had been buried began to lift their heads, daring to hope again. "From today forward," I said, my voice resolute, "this will no longer be a silent department. I want you to debate, to challenge, even to question me if necessary. We are going to change the way this company steps into the world, and you will be recognized under your own names." The room filled with nods, quickened breaths. I could feel new life sparking to the surface the fire that had been long extinguished under Brian's shadow. When the meeting ended, Sarah lingered behind. She looked at me, her eyes shining. "Miss Carter, how did you go from being invisible to standing here today?" I smiled. I stopped waiting for a miracle, and I stopped believing that my worth depended on whether others acknowledged it. In that moment, I realized true power wasn't only in the title on the desk. It was in helping those brilliant people rise so that none of them would ever again have to suffer stolen credit, borrowed names, or the darkness I had endured for so long. Chapter 8. Empowering the Invisible. In the days that followed, I realized my new job wasn't only about managing projects or sitting in boardroom meetings. What truly weighed on me was a question: how many other women in this company were living the same way I once had? One afternoon, Liam stopped by my office. He placed a folder on my desk and said, "We want you to lead a new program, a mentorship for women with potential who have never been properly recognized." I fell silent. Faces flashed through my mind, Sarah, Linda, and others whose voices had been buried under the shadows of their superiors. Perhaps this was the chance to do more for them, for all those who had never even dared to dream that their names might appear on a report or proposal. I started with small meetings. Rebecca, a young attorney in the legal department, once confided in me that for 5 years she had drafted documents and built legal strategies. But when it came time to present them in court or to the board, her boss always took the credit. She had even thought about leaving the profession. I met Rebecca at a quiet cafe. She sat across from me, hands gripping her coffee cup, eyes cast down. I don't know if I can keep going. All my work disappears the moment my boss stands up to take the praise. I reached over, gently held her hand, and looked her straight in the eye. Rebecca, I was in that same position. for 20 years. But one day I realized silence costs more than speaking up. Enduring makes us vanish, but if we dare to step forward, the world will have no choice but to see us. She bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes. I knew she had found a spark. Day by day, the list of women who came to me grew longer. Elena from marketing, who had crafted bold advertising concepts, only to watch her male supervisor repackage them and claim them as his own. Amanda from finance, who had saved the company millions with her risk analysis model, yet only heard her male colleague being praised in the meeting. Each story made me more certain this injustice wasn't an exception. It was a system, and it was time for change. In those mentoring sessions, I didn't just teach them how to analyze data or build strategies. I taught them how to document evidence of their work, how to stand and present, instead of letting someone else speak for them, how to say, "This is my idea," without trembling. One evening, after a long day of work, I looked around the office, still glowing with light. Women staying late, their eyes alight with determination, believing for the first time that their work mattered. And I realized the most important thing wasn't just that I had stepped out of the shadows, but that I was pulling others with me. That night, leaving the building, I lifted my eyes to the city sky. The stars no longer seemed scattered and alone. They burned together, forming a brilliant galaxy, and I knew if enough women dared to raise their voices, our light would never again be hidden. Chapter 9. Speaking before thousands. One afternoon, Jennifer, my assistant, walked into my office, her face a mixture of nerves and excitement. "Ms. Carter, there's an invitation from the National Women's Leadership Conference. They want you as the keynote speaker at this year's event in Chicago. The theme is Breaking Career Glass Ceilings." I sat in silence, my fingers brushing against the thick paper of the invitation. For 20 years, I had been invisible, writing success for someone else. And now I was being asked to tell that story, before hundreds, even thousands of women, searching for a way out of their own silence. On the day of the conference, I stood backstage, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might shatter. I heard the host's voice boom across the auditorium. "Please welcome Danielle Carter, Head of Global Operations at Hartwell Industries." The applause roared like ocean waves. I stepped out. Under the spotlight, more than 800 women young graduates just entering the workforce, seasoned professionals, weary from years of struggle, fixed their eyes on me. I began with a question: how many of you have ever seen your idea repeated in a meeting only for someone else to take all the credit? A forest of hands shot up. The room echoed with sighs and eyes full of recognition. I told my story. 20 years of drafting strategies, building forecasting models, designing global plans, all under someone else's name. I spoke of the dinners I spent washing dishes, while my husband's name appeared in magazines as a visionary leader. I spoke of the silence that strangled me until I believed I was nothing more than a cook and a bed warmer. The hall went completely still. Many wiped away tears. Then I said, "The greatest danger is not when someone else takes credit for your work. It is when you believe you only deserve to stand behind them." I lived like that for 2 decades, until one day I stopped waiting for miracles. I stopped staying silent. And when I stepped into the light, I realized the pen had always been in my hand. I had simply forgotten that I had the right to write my own story. Thunderous applause. Women leapt to their feet row by row until the entire hall was on fire with sound. The ovation lasted so long I had to pause several minutes before I could continue. When the speech ended, many came to me whispering, "You spoke my truth." A doctor told me that for 15 years, her research had been published under the name of her male department head. A young architect, trembling as she handed me her business card, said she would leave her firm to open her own studio after hearing my story. That night back in the hotel, I looked into the mirror. I no longer saw the woman who had been turned into a shadow behind her husband. I saw a guide, a flame, and I knew I had not only changed my own life, I had sparked a movement. Chapter 10. the ending for the man who lived in another's shadow. After the conference in Chicago, I returned into the whirlwind of change. The media mentioned my name. Industry colleagues sought my advice. And most importantly, women from everywhere sent letters telling me they had finally dared to speak up after hearing my story. Meanwhile, Brian quietly sank. He was now just a middle manager sitting in a small office reporting to colleagues who had once been his subordinates. I heard whispers that he often came in late, avoided interaction, and no longer dared to attend company parties, the very stage he used to claim as his own. One evening, as I was preparing documents for the next day's meeting, Brian stood at the doorway of my office. Gone was the confident figure I once knew. What remained was a weary man, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. "Danielle," he sighed, "do you regret it? Regret making everything turn out this way?" I looked up, meeting his gaze head on. "No, the only thing I regret is staying silent for far too long." He was silent for a long time. Then he lowered his head and murmured, "I never realized that in trying to keep you small, I was making myself smaller." I didn't reply. There was no need anymore. In the days that followed, I officially led the global team into the expansion project in Asia. Ideas once dismissed were now coming to life. Sarah Martinez, now a senior analyst, stood proudly before the board presenting her research. Linda Torres spearheaded a campaign in South America, her name signed on the report for the very first time. I looked at them and realized my victory was not only a title, but that I had pulled many others out of the shadows with me. One late evening, as I left the office building, I stood under the star-filled sky. I remembered Brian's humiliating introduction at the gala. "She's just the one who cooks and keeps the bed warm." Now the world knew I was far more than that. I was the mind behind multi-million-dollar strategies. I was a leader and inspiration. I was myself, Danielle Carter. And the greatest irony, the man who stole my credit for 20 years was now reporting to his superiors, while I stood on stage receiving ovations. I smiled, whispering to myself, "At last, justice has come." But most of all, I have found myself again. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. The moment I'll never forget was when he read the email announcing that I had become his superior. After years of being belittled, I finally stood up not just for myself, but for every woman who's ever had her voice stolen. And what about you? Which moment in this story felt the most satisfying to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss the next powerful revenge stories and true Reddit stories here on Scarlet Vows. I'll see you in the next episode.